We are seeing early examples of better, in inverted commas, online learning where student performance on a raft of measures, both academic and other, far exceed its face-to-face equivalent. For now, I think it's fair to say that we are seeing monumental levels of change in our sector. So if you wouldn't mind just jumping to the next slide, Tony. Great. So if it isn't clear from my tone and intonation, I guess it is extremely early here in Melbourne, Australia. I'm incredibly passionate about EdTech and its role in higher education. Not so much in the technologies itself, but rather in the strategy and the mindset we need to embrace technology and to lead reform. So as mentioned earlier by Rosa, I am the Managing Director of the Kahoot Academy. Kahoot is an organizational learning partner that inspires people in organizations to rekindle love for learning and to bring about or enhance its learning culture. We build a number of programs in three principal categories, namely human capabilities, digital skills, and also contemporary ways of working. And as Rosa also mentioned, I wear another hat, and I am the founder of ConnectEd, crowdsourced education, where higher education professionals from around the globe come together to learn from and with one another through robust conversation. Most of our courses are facilitated by experts, and learning is supported by well-curated thought leadership pieces from several leading minds in the field. So next slide, please, Tony. Thank you. So I mentioned the fact that EdTech is booming, and I'm a big fan and supporter of the team at Holland IQ, and I see one of the slides previously has referenced them. They have a raft of valuable free and paid for resources, and as you can see from the example cited here, China most certainly leads the way in terms of the value of EdTech funding rounds. We are seeing an unsurprising absolute explosion in the OPM and bootcamp markets over this COVID pandemic time, but also over the last several years, with university partnerships reaching record highs with little to absolutely no signs, in my opinion, of slowing down. Although poorly defined, and this was raised a little bit earlier, EdTech is set to arrive imminently at the $10 trillion mark. As with the move towards micro-credentials, EdTech is a relatively nascent term that still needs some time to normalize and to be better understood. For now, the community I certainly engage tend to lump a great deal into EdTech, and it's seemingly becoming a catch-all phrase for everything digital, innovative, and enabling. While we may disagree on definitions and what's included within the EdTech basket, there is a universal agreement that EdTech is making a big impact, both economically and also for student well-being and for the likes of faculty and the like. So not explicit in these shifts I articulated earlier, but EdTech is also playing an important role in the unbundling of higher education. We're seeing an incredible leapfrog forward in the move towards unbundling qualifications into various component parts, most notably shorter and more succinct and practically applied skills, but increasingly also move towards unbundling traditional university and college experiences, where activities previously managed by the university are more and more frequently being outsourced to specialist providers ready with best-in-class UX and student experience to support students and deliver very affordable and innovative solutions, most notably at scale. Sorry, next slide, please, Tony, if you don't mind. Thanks again, referencing Holland IQ as we have given them a solid punt for the morning. They've created an open source taxonomy that does a really stellar job of curating and categorizing the EdTech landscape, making it accessible and understandable for everyone in the sector. I'd strongly encourage you to go through this website in quite some detail, because it really does a fantastic job of curating a very complex landscape. So if we certainly don't have time to go into the detail here, but I hope that we will get into the weeds a little during the Q&A, and also I'm available at any stage post today's conversation to go through this with you and point you in the right directions. For now, I think it's enough to say that there is a wealth of information. The challenge is often how we use these insights, how we wrestle with our intuitions, and really adopt the learnings derived from the conversations and discourse that we have with our colleagues. And this tends to be the biggest challenge we have at the moment. So next slide, please, Tony. So throughout the connected learning experience, and in many conversations I have around the future of higher education, I'm often asked, and I often ask my guests and also been asked myself, how we are meant to navigate the new normal in higher education. And I've summarized my position as follows. The sector is in a very precarious position today. For me, we must develop a deep empathy for people, and to rekindle the love for learning is critically important if we're to survive and then thrive in the generations to come. We need to be open to partnerships, whether that be industry university partnerships with EdTech, OPM and the like, or also partnering in or entering into co-opetition with other private and public universities, and or even partnering with our principal stakeholders, our students, to create the learning experiences of the future. Then we need to think strategically, use our collective intelligence to make informed, unbiased decisions that support people of all colors, shapes, sizes, etc., to be curious and to be empowered to global human agenda. So next slide, please, Tony. And in closing, just in terms of framing out today's conversation, there are many theories and predictions about the future state of higher education. Personally, I'm often persuaded that things aren't as bad as they seem, but at other times I'm gravely concerned about our institutions and both their willingness and ability to bring about real reform that's going to make a real difference in students' lives. I remind myself often about the concerns I have with Google and others entering and playing actively in higher education. And I'm equally and acutely aware of the advances in technology that could nullify our endeavor altogether, as you're seeing on the screen. It is now time for each and every one of us to be bold, to have difficult conversations, and to center ourselves around our institutions center our institutions around our students. We need to find technologies to support our vision and be the best partners to co-create our success. We need to carve out a time for deep introspection and to reflect on our purpose as educators. So thanks again for this opportunity to share my initial thoughts and to introduce topics for today's conversation. I really look forward to hearing from Chris and Mike, of course, and to then enter into some Q&A towards the end.
Great, thank you so much for that information, Warren. Your presentation is certainly deeply appreciated. Next, we're going to switch gears and switch presentations from, or we're going to let Mike take over. But when we invited Mike to be a panelist today, what we asked him to help him think through what we wanted to hear from him were, what are some of the latest technologies that could be applied to international learning engagement? And so through some discussions with Mike, he is now going to present to us in that area. And thank you so much. Looks like he's already loaded up, so I'll hand it over to Mike.
Great, thanks, George, and thanks, Warren. That was terrific. Really appreciate this topic. And you know, there were so many ways we could go as we were discussing with the team. What would be the best sort of technology and the use of that technology to focus on? And this is one that we're highly involved in, and it's one that we think is really interesting. And it revolves around this idea of creating experiences for our students, right? In this experience age, and their expectation gets very, very challenging when we think about this virtual world that we're in. One of these ways to create experiences inside of learning, and we think has really great applicability, particularly as we think about international higher education, is extended reality and virtual reality as a component to that. And if you haven't heard the term XR, XR stands for extended reality and really involves all of the versions of alternate reality. So augmented reality, virtual reality, et cetera. One of the things that we see in virtual reality is that we typically learn faster and we retain that knowledge better, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about doing it in a real-life simulation or a real-life training module versus a virtual model. But one of the things that we believe we'll find out in a lot of the research that's going on is that virtual reality, because we put on goggles and all of a sudden we're in another world or we're in another situation, allows us to focus in on that situation because the rest of the world goes away. And so this is one of those areas that we think if we think smartly about it, we could do some really interesting things. And so I wanted to share some of those. And some of the areas that we're really interested is how can VR in particular and extended realities help? And one of those areas is definitely in design. And so the ability to do design in VR allows us to do really creative things and to speed up that creative process. So we're already seeing it as part of the absolute foundation inside of aviation and automotive design, but also in architecture. We're also seeing this heavily involved in data science and the ability for us to actually visualize data in a whole new way. And if you're a data scientist, being able to virtually see 18 strains of data and then to rethink the visualization of that data to help it make sense, VR becomes this really kind of cool way to do that. And I think what will be probably one of the most important use cases is in situational learning and experiential learning. And so we're actually seeing a software program here in the center called Immersion that allows in-service teachers, so those students that are in College of Education, to learn to teach to virtual students and to practice on virtual students instead of practicing on their real students, which is typically what we see happen. Some other kind of cool use cases that are definitely interesting. In the bottom right-hand corner, we actually see a program called Art Attack that allows artists to 3D experience art. And so this particular artist took Botticelli's Birth of Venus, which if you've ever seen is gorgeous in Florence. I've been there and lucky enough to be there, but to visualize it in a whole new way to be able to experience it in 3 dimensions. Or in the upper right-hand corner, we see Dassault Systems, who actually uses VR to help train their airline mechanics and their engine mechanics. And they actually take their VR headsets with them when they go out on site to actually work on aircraft. And in the upper left-hand corner, we see McLaren, who actually does all of their design as well as their wind tunnel testing virtually, which helps them speed up their process of design 10 times faster and provide really the world is your oyster in design, right? Which is one of these sort of options that we look for. VR allows this to happen. And as we think of kind of clinical uses inside of sciences, we see in the bottom right-hand corner, actually this dentistry student in his gym shorts practicing on the order of operations of how to fill a cavity. And so being able to practice on a virtual patient and learn those order of operations over and over again, get good at that so that when you actually become engaged with that patient, you can focus on the patient because you've already done all of this order of operations 20, 30, 40 times. We see a cool sort of use case of providing virtual cadavers in the bottom left-hand corner from Colorado State University, where they actually, during the pandemic, sent their medical school students and their vet school students home with VR kits so they could continue to do their wet lab work in a virtual environment. And then use cases for helping patients learn how to deal with pain and to put yourself in a whole nother world allows them to focus in another area where they might not have to use as much pain medication in surgery, as well as those folks that might have addictions or phobias, et cetera. So some really cool use cases. The last 2 use cases I'll leave you with, and then I'll share a little full video, are some cool tools we think really have applicability in international learning. The one on the left is a software program called Ovation that allows students to actually practice communication skills in front of a virtual audience. And you can pick and choose your situation. Do I have a clicker? Do I have a microphone? Am I speaking in front of a judge and jury? Am I doing an interview? Am I presenting to the head of a company my software solution? And the ability to do this in practice over and over again, get great feedback, hugely valuable. And then the software tool on the right is a program called Engage that allows us to actually do meetings like we are here in Zoom, but to do those in virtual reality where we can share three-dimensional content. We actually use this at HP with our engineering teams as we're working on products, and the ability to have folks that might be in China or in Europe communicate with our folks here in the US and help solve problems. The last thing I'll leave you with here is just a cool little video and then some links that we think might be important as you go forward. And we love this video from Jeremy Bailenson, who comes from Stanford, and their use in VR.
In this garage, an industry was born. Literally, Silicon Valley started here. So in this garage, they were tinkering physically. At Stanford, what we tinker with is not tools like this. We tinker with virtual reality simulations and test what they do to the mind. My name is Jeremy Bailenson. I founded Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab. I'm a professor that studies virtual reality. If you think about what makes us special, what makes all of us different from one another, there's of course a genetic component, but it's really about your experiences. If you think about the top 10 things who've made you, you, a lot of those are going to be 5-minute, really intense, wonderful, and maybe some not so wonderful experiences along our journey. What VR does is it gives you this fantastical experience that could be built by any programmer to do anything. However, the brain treats it as if it were real. And so working with HP, we're designing an amazing set of experiences that really make you rethink hard issues. And one of our lines of research for 15 years now has asked the question, how are we going to use VR to solve tough problems? And the paradigm of the virtual mirror is you walk up to a mirror, you put on the goggles, you're in virtual reality, and you see yourself. We've scanned your body and it looks like you, and then we hit a button and you become a different gender, a different race, and you then occupy someone's body, you walk a mile in their shoes. VR becomes a tool to study how other people experience the world and bridging that gap between the self and others. We treat virtual reality as a medium, and we ask the big question, what is a person in an age where VR is everywhere? How is this medium going to change the world?
Love that video and the way that it starts to talk about this experiential learning and providing this. And here's some great resources. We think if you have interest in learning more about this, EDUCAUSE has some really great tools and resources around the research in this area. We'll make sure we share these links with you all. I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be a part of this. And I sure thank you for joining. And I'm going to pass on to Chris. Chris, and I'll turn it over to you for some great information.
Well, and of course, thank you, Mike, for that wonderful presentation. And while Chris is getting his information loaded up, I wanted everyone to know that when we first spoke with Chris, we asked him, are there any new forms of partnerships that are changing educational delivery? And that helped form this conversation for today's webinar. I also want everyone to know that I am monitoring the questions that are in the chat box and that have been used in the question feature. So those are being aggregated, and we'll collectively work on answering those at the end of the presentations. So next, Chris, are you ready to load up your slides?
I'm ready to go.
Perfect, thank you, sir.
So much. That was fascinating, Mike. Thank you. And I love the McLaren references. That's my Formula One team, and we certainly need some improvement on our performance. So I'm hoping that some of that VR can help us. As was introduced, my name is Chris Parish. I'm our president at Podium Education. And I thought you heard some pretty thoughtful analysis from Warren at the beginning on sort of the future of EdTech and what's happening right now. And we are part of that trend of sort of the growing university partnerships that come with the trend over the last couple months. So we've been around for just 2 years. We're a relatively new company. And we think about the world and our potential impact on global education and international education from the perspective of programming and curriculum. In some ways, you can think of us as a little bit of like a curriculum as a service provider. And I think there are many areas and parts of global education that have embraced, in particular here over the last 6 months, the need to develop virtual programs. But I think there's also a lot of our space, whether that's within our own universities or across the education abroad space, that is pretty hesitant, just to say it frankly, right, about virtual education and whether things can be done online as good, if not better, than in person. And we really took that to heart at Podium. So we wanted to really reimagine from the ground up what a digital experience could look like for global education. And, for us, similar to, I think, a lot of folks within education abroad offices, our number one hurdle as a company are preconceived notions of online education. And that's because there have been a lot of online education programs that just frankly haven't been good. And here over the last 6 months, 7 months, we've also seen a lot of programs that, due to necessity, have been forced to go from on campus to online. And the way that we think about the world is that what you would design from a fully digital, fully online experience, if you're designing it from scratch, would look significantly different than a lot of the other virtual or online programs that are out there, in particular within the education abroad areas, like virtual internships, for instance. So I wanted to ask sort of everybody on this call to sort of I'll actually use a reference from Men in Black. I don't know how many people know the Men in Black movie, but in the Men in Black movie, Will Smith holds up this pen and can basically erase everybody's mind with this pen. So I'm doing that to you right now with my yellow highlighter, because I really want to sort of break this down to the infrastructure and ask this question: that if you were designing a virtual global education program from scratch, what would be those components that you would build it on? Like, what would be some of your dream features? And this is the exact problem we thought about at Podium Education about a year ago. And there's a couple of dream features. There's actually 4 of them that I'm going to share with you that have been really important for us as we design programming for our university partners. The first one is that this is a global education program. We want a diverse set of students, right? A truly global student mix. We want to pull students who are here domestic in the US. We want to pull students from different demographics even within the US. We all know that there's a wide range of spectrum of students who may want to study abroad or pursue a global education opportunity. And we certainly want diversity there, as well as within the international student pipeline. We want to be mixing international students with domestic students purposefully so that we can design a program that really speaks to both sides of the aisle, at least from a global education perspective. So we've got a global mix of students is sort of our first component that we really thought would be important to design a powerful virtual global education program. Second to that, we want students to be studying and to be pursuing academic content that, once again, is global in nature, right? So at Podium, we went out and found prominent companies from across the world, companies like Airbnb and Spotify and Netflix and some of these other big names, and work with them to acquire proprietary case studies from them so that we could teach students who, once again, through bullet point number 1, are across the world, teach them things and have them think about business problems and tech problems from the perspective of international companies, right? That really lends itself to a powerful discussion if you're able to add those 2 together. Third, let's highlight those case studies and those student discussions with featured guest lectures, right? Guest lecturers that may have radically different views about the world, because those guest lecturers are coming from places like Africa and Asia and South America, in addition to the US. And we think these 3 components together are principles of really high quality and well thought out global education. Lastly, when we thought about what we wanted the outcomes of our global education digital programs to be, we thought of outcomes in 2 different buckets. One are, I guess, your more traditional global education international education outcomes around intercultural learning and other pieces. But in addition to that, we thought it would be great if what students actually studied in these programs led to career opportunities, direct path to interesting careers. So our curriculum that we build with our university partners is almost entirely tech and data skill based. So students not only get exposure to those international companies with a lot of different student perspectives, but they're doing so within a discipline like digital marketing or data analytics or web development and coding. So down the back end of their program, not only are they a better worldly citizen, but they're also equipped with those skills that almost regardless of the geography or country will lead to a more direct path to the career than they would otherwise have. And those are the 4 components that we really thought of as imperative to designing these world-class global education experiences. What I want to show with you, just to sort of try and show you what this looks like in a practical sense, right, is a program that we're developing with our friends at Arizona State University. This is a clip from one of the global data boot camps that we've designed. And I'm going to let this video play. But I think you'll get a sense from this case study, the way that we went out and found international oriented business case studies to really be the bedrock of the conversation and the curriculum for students. So I'm going to let this play. And this is from the student's perspective. This is what a student would learn in one of our global education programs.
Netflix is the world's largest subscription streaming service with roughly 158 million subscribers worldwide. Netflix is available in every country in the world except China, North Korea, and Syria. So it is very difficult to produce content and a UX design for every single one of those countries in a way that is tailored to each country's unique cultural tastes. That is, unless you have data. And Netflix has lots and lots of data. If you've ever wondered how Netflix is able to continually be a leader in the streaming service industry, one that keeps you engaged and coming back for new content, you've got A/B testing to thank for that. In fact, every single product change goes through a rigorous A/B testing process before becoming the default user experience. Just think about that for a moment. If you've ever seen Netflix change something on your home screen and thought, oh hey, that's neat, none of that was ever decided by committee, but instead on the success of an A/B test. Netflix, because it controls all of the content on its homepage, is essentially a data-driven billboard. It's kind of like if the billboard in your hometown changed depending on who was looking at it. Now, you may not have noticed.
So you'll get a sense here that from Dr. Alvarez there that it's actually, in this particular example, it's actually Netflix was the first company that really figured out that it's the imagery that they show us is actually the most important component on whether we actually convert to watch that particular show. And I think that Netflix case study is a great example of how we've leveraged international company data to give students a really unique viewpoint on international education and really a nice podium really for them to be able to have conversations about different data and technical skills from an international perspective that is frankly a really unique digital experience that we're proud to work with a bunch of our university partners on. That's all I had, George. I'll kick it back to you.
No, that's fantastic. And Tony's gonna load up these slides to help frame, this balance of time that we have to talk through some questions. Now, of course, thank you to all of our presenters for providing such really interesting things to think about. And I'm not sure I quite feel all of those things in my professional setting just yet, but I can recognize that they're starting to take hold. Now, some questions that we had from the audience today, I want to share those questions first and see if we can't get a few answers there. These are in the chat box, but some of them may have gotten lost a little bit. Warren, while you were speaking, Ian Wright said, with so many platforms being used across departments and communities, is there a single platform for overseeing and aggregating information, like some sort of master dashboard for SIOs and boards to manage ever-growing tech additions and advancements?
Wow.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I'm not I'm not intimately familiar with any one solution at this stage that's doing a wonderful job of that. In fact, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we face, and one that we need to solve, is that in my experience, having worked with many universities and colleges around the world, the aggregation of that data seems to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks, and the disparate nature of learning. So when Chris was sharing his slides at ASU, it seemed to be in a self-contained some kind of learning management system or a learning experience platform of some kind. But what we generally find is that we're sending students off in a myriad of different directions. They've got a WhatsApp group, they've got a Slack channel, they've got various different technologies that they're using that round out their learning experience. And the problem for me is that it gets lost in translation, which is, of course, the nature of the question that's been posed. So no, I'm not intimately familiar with anything that's trying to get into that space. Most like institutions like Kahoot and others are trying to create a self-contained ecosystem so that they can better manage that data. But it is a grave challenge.
And thank you to those of you who continue to put questions in the chat box. I encourage that and really appreciate it. A few other questions that I have that I've already collected. Duff Archie asks, how important is investing in international education from the board, provost, or upper administration perspective right now? And where is that budget going, and how is this prioritized? This is, I think, directed broadly to any panelist who'd be interested in addressing that.
I'll take a cut at it first. I think what most people are going to feel on their campuses, and at least this is the impression I've gotten as I've talked to a number of international offices and education abroad offices over the last couple of months, is that asking for investment right now is a really tough thing because of where most universities find themselves from a budget standpoint with the pandemic. So finding ways to provide creative solutions to give students access to education abroad like experiences, short of actually going there and doing it while showing that you can be a self-sustaining unit, aka driving some revenue, right, collecting some program fees on the side, has been the ticket for my partners. So figuring out ways to form partnerships with folks to provide students with those opportunities while still creating some revenue and a new revenue stream for the university has been an easy way to sort of ask for that investment hand in hand with what you've been able to create with new partnerships. So that's one perspective. I don't know if Mike or Warren wanted to add anything.
Yeah, would completely agree, Chris. We're hearing the same thing in our conversations with presidents, provosts. There's definite interest. I think they're looking for that return, right? So if we're going to invest and we're going to go build some of these programs, what is the return on that? And so I think that's where we all have to help in that space, right? Help them realize what that return looks like.
Well, and Mike, thank you for adding that extra piece there from your presentation, which really suggests some amazing ways to use VR and XR for international education. How do we do this at a student level in an affordable way?
Yeah, well, I wish I could tell you it's 100% affordable. It's not yet, right? But these technologies are the costs anyways are being driven down, right? And I think as we see more of this democratization of the technology, it becomes more widely accepted. And I think actually the current pandemic is helping us in that space because folks are looking for new ways to make this work. Definitely help. Is this, for example, a full-on virtual reality experience? There's opportunities for us to create some of that content on our own, right? And we might be able to do that at the university level. We may have computer science expertise, right? That might be able to help us in that development. But I think there's also an opportunity for us to share some of this content as it's being created. And so just like that previous question, George, one of the things that we're asking is the VR community, so that technology community, along with the higher ed community, is there a way for us to pull together a not-for-profit oriented platform where educators could share some of that content, could share some of the models they're building so that other folks could take advantage of it? And I think that sharing is going to be a place where we start to level the costs of this.
Yeah. And I'd love to add a perspective there too. I think it's dead on what Mike is saying there around how there's this concept of a platform business that is popping up across a lot of different industries, and I think education is next. And at Podium, one way that we thought about the world is, sure, we could partner with a number of different universities and build these global education programs from the ground up. But anytime you're doing that, right, there's an outlay of capital, and there's a cost there that is a no-go for a lot of offices right now. So the way that we thought about things is, why don't we sort of find sort of these dream faculty and guest speakers and the international case studies that I mentioned, build it all once, and then build in some variability or some configurability, if you will, so that each university can put their own spin on things, but generally be able to bring those programs to institutions across the country and do it in a way that's virtually turnkey. And that, I think, is a version of a platform business that has been attractive to a lot of our partners, because you don't have to go out and RFP and wait 9 months and then invest in a new OPM and build things up for 9 months. And I think I'm sure there are other businesses out there operating similar to Podium in that way. But we found that as a sort of a little bit of like an instant sugar high, if you will, to be able to get this out to students quickly.
No, thank you for that. Now, Soraya asks, not all global education programs would want to concentrate on technical skills. It's not all data analysts or web development. Some would like to focus on skills like language learning, cultural awareness, what might be called soft skills. How can we leverage tech to enhance learning in those domains? And I guess I put that out to everybody.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. Hopefully you saw some of those tools I shared last, right? The software tool Ovation, I think, is one of those ways for us to learn cultures, right? And to be able to have discussions in a virtual way about that cultural difference. The ability to use tools like Engage to see virtually others from around the globe and to be able to share some of those cultural differences and what is normal in one country may be offensive in another, and how do we handle those situations. And to do so when we're seeing each other and being able to interact or interact with objects. It's not about the technology, it's about how we use it to enhance that sort of connectivity. That's, I think, where the power lies.
Oh,
Yeah, maybe just, sorry, I don't know who I interrupted, sorry, but just to add 10 cents onto that, I think the Kahoot Academy, we also passionate about training enterprise skills or 21st century skills or human skills, whatever you want to refer to them as. And we find that it's through very careful learning design, one can really extract insights and be able to get people to share and communicate as a community of people. That makes the difference. It's not necessarily around the tech. The tech accelerates and enhances and amplifies all of that experience for the students. But by and large, if you get people to trust one another in a community that's geared towards an appreciation of the subject matter and for people to be able and willing to enter into conversation, that's where the true magic happens. And so careful learning design and good questioning and good curation of materials is all that's required in some instances.
Now, Warren, I think this may end up being our last official question, because there are some great questions out there right now about screen fatigue and community college adoption and things like this. But for you specifically, Warren, I also wondered, how do you think colleges and universities are responding to the fourth industrial revolution, or at least industry 4.0, this terminology? And what are the key things that need to happen now as we're closing up our webinar for today?
Yeah, look, I mean, thanks for handballing the biggest problem right now to somebody that hasn't had enough coffee, but I'll take an initial stab. Like in the presentation, I covered off some of the things that I think are really important. Partnership is definitely one. It's run through pretty clearly in this presentation from both Mike and Chris. We need to reevaluate our position and really have some thoughtful leadership around this, because my view is far more pessimistic, especially after one cup of coffee, about what we're seeing in the market at the moment. And we're really going to need a seismic shift in the way we think about our role as educators, as I mentioned before. So we've got to find our passion again, the reason why we're entering into the space, and the motivations behind what we do and why we do it. We've got to be partnering with individuals, and we've got to be spending a lot of time with in reflection about what it is that the future state we want for the sector. I think I'm just going to ramble on for the next 10 minutes speaking about my passion for this particular topic, and I don't think I'm going to answer that question satisfactorily well, but I'd encourage just anybody that's interested in continuing those conversations to really just reach out and have that conversation and look at what we are doing in these respective outfits that have been presented today, because there's clearly a passion and a willingness and a desire to support that reform.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for the incredible questions from the participants today. And thank you for the really informed and expert level responses and the links that you're providing as resources as panelists. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. You know, an hour is never enough, but it still gets us a place where we can start this conversation. From any of the other panelists, were there any last remarks we wanted to address before we move into closing the webinar? We want to be respectful of everyone's time. So Tony, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. You know, if, well, Rosa, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in. Oh, you're on mute. That's what's going on.
Yes, thank you, George. I wanted to say thank you to all participants in the chat and all the questions that maybe were not answered because we didn't have time. But we are inviting all of you to look for more information for the next edition of the Gateway Leadership Institute. So please check our webpage, and there you will find more information.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. And Tony, I believe you want
to... let me maybe wrap us up here and say thank you once again to Mike, Warren, and Chris. Terrific presentation. As I expected, however, it would be intimidating, and it was. I'm sitting here scribbling notes down very quickly and copying and pasting links in from the chat. I knew I would be intimidated, but I'm also knowing that I am very, very excited. And as you were speaking today, I was thinking, gosh, do we really have an option? And I would say that we really don't have an option right now. This isn't an opt-in or opt-out situation. The pandemic, as I started at the outset of the webinar today by saying that it's accelerating changes in higher education, and it's certainly accelerating changes, but also providing opportunities for international higher education. If you remember, some of you have been around for a while, we used to have all of our education abroad applications as paper applications. Well, no one can imagine a paper application now. So it's not as if we haven't been embracing new technologies over the decades. We certainly have. But now I think what we have is an acceleration at hand, and one that really presents these opportunities. For example, with virtual advising, now we've seen that we don't necessarily have to have scheduled time where students show up or not to our in-office appointments, that we can actually do very robust and very influential advising in other means. We're also seeing that our programs that for many years, we've only relied on purely mobility-based programming. Students have to be abroad in order to have an experience. And what we're seeing now, and have been seeing with this type of technology and other approaches, is that it's not a replacement of mobility, but it's an expansion of, in ways to be able to expose students to new ways of learning, new access to learning that can be efficient, affordable, and reliable. And so I'm actually, yes, intimidated, but also very, very excited. So again, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Chris. And thank you as well to our Gateway Leadership Institute facilitators, Rosa and George. It's really great for all of you to be able to join us today. So please note that this session was recorded. And if you want to go back and re-listen to something that Mike said or what Chris said or Warren said, you'll be able to do that. Just go to the Gateway International Group website. You'll be able to find a recording of today's webinar. Please stay tuned. Gateway is doing many other of announcements and webinars and other types of events. And so with that, I wish everyone a good day, especially Warren. Go get your coffee. I see it's daylight coming behind you there. Everyone, thank you very much. Have a good week ahead and stay well.
Thank you.